Hi. Hi.
Hello.
Okay, so let me open up the paper here. So let me go back to the assignments and find the paper that I uploaded to see what if I have more comments that I wrote besides my comments on your draft. And so go here, and so here we go. And so let me download this and then save it again, save as, and go here. Of course, I can't just easily save that because it's not allowing me to. So let me go here and see if we find like that. Second. Okay. And then let me save it again just in case I want to make some more changes here. And of course, it's not too easy to do this. Okay, and save. Okay. Okay, so let me share the screen here, and you can see that, I think. And all right. So, to what degree has the global environment surrounding the EU's foreign policy ambitions changed in the last decade and a half? What has been the EU's response? So, what do you think the of the European Union's? Are you following what's going on with regard to Ukraine right now?
No, not really.
Yeah, I mean, Russia is mobilizing tens of thousands of soldiers, and there's lots of media discussion. I mean,
they sent.
Pardon?
I just know that they sent like, what was it, like 175,000 or 75,000?
That was the projection. I think that's what the CIA is projecting for what it's worth. That the CIA is projecting the Russians are going to deploy there. And I don't know. The question is, what do they think they're going to do? Are they going to, if they invade and try to partition Ukraine? I don't think they would, but that would be, even just partitioning Ukraine would be a horrible civil war. I mean, I think that you would see, even from the war that happened from the Russian intervention to encourage the Russian minority groups in Donbass and Crimea to rise up there. 13,000 dead and over 1 million refugees. So you can imagine that if there was an invasion to partition Ukraine, we'd have thousands of more dead and tens of thousands and not more of refugees. And so you might think this is all just basically, effort to try to pressure the West to make sure that Ukraine will not join NATO. But that's the media reporting that Vladimir Putin administration in Moscow wants commitments that the United States will never permit NATO or Ukraine to join NATO. And I guess that includes the European Union. They don't mention that. They don't mention the European Union in today's New York Times reports that I've been reading. Of course, we note that back in 2014, the pro-Russian, I think I talked about this in class, right? The pro-Russian president of Ukraine at the time, Viktor Yanukovych, who was democratically elected according to a fair election, refused to sign a free trade agreement with the association agreement with the European Union. And when he announced he wasn't going to do it, and he was being pressured by the Russians were putting economic pressure on Ukraine because the Ukrainian economy still had been so dependent upon Russian supplies and integrated into old Soviet production chains. And he was putting tremendous pressure on economic pressure on him. He had campaigned when he was running for president that, I'm committed, Ukraine. I'm committed to taking Ukraine into the European Union. Oh, sure, yes. And then he goes to Ukraine. He goes to Brussels to sign the agreement. He says, "I'm not signing the agreement." I mean, I think he actually went to Brussels and announced, "I'm not signing," and he went back home. And that was when the Euromaidan uprising, the Euromaidan and Maidan Square in Kiev began. And this protests against Yanukovych and Yanukovych's police internal police mobilized against them, and they started shooting people, and something like 80 people were killed in the demonstrations, shot by snipers and others. And as I mentioned, including this professor, there was a professor at that Ukrainian Catholic University that I mentioned at the last class. According to the president, when I was there for a conference, he said one of their professors went to the Euromaidan protest and got shot through the heart and was killed, of course. And so, but that was when that was all instigated. Of course, also I shall also mention they're not mentioning also in today's news reports, because I still remember I was here teaching at the university that American officials publicly went to Kiev and encouraged the protesters. Victoria Nuland, who was in the Obama administration, she came back into the Biden administration. She's now got a promotion. She's in the Biden administration. Herman van Rompuy, the president of the European Council, he went to Kiev and encouraged the protesters. John McCain, Senator John McCain, who ran against Barack Obama in 2008 for president, he encouraged the protesters. And then Yanukovych fled the country and is now living somewhere in Russia. And it was at that point that when he fled the country that Vladimir Putin began dismembering Ukraine. He sent in forces covertly into Crimea, and they took over the entire Crimea without firing a shot, which shows you about the intensity of Ukrainian nationalism in Crimea. Not very intense, and then they encouraged the Russian-speaking minority in Luhansk and Donetsk, the Donbass area, to rise up with the support of unofficial, covert Soviet Russian soldiers, and he included, air support for support against Ukrainian Air Force, any Ukrainian Air Force attacks, and sent anti aircraft missile equipment to these rebels in Luhansk and Donetsk. And they shot down a Malaysian passenger jet. Do you remember this? They shot down a Malaysian passenger jet that was flying over the area. Apparently it was an accident. They thought it was maybe a Ukrainian, Air Force. And they killed like almost 300 people, civilians, a Malaysian airline jet. And the YouTube is on video. Somebody actually recorded it. I could show it. Somebody recorded the missile blowing. You can hear it blow up, and you can see it take down this aircraft. And they do note in the New York Times report today that this was all happening in 2014. So this is 7 years ago. But in 2008, NATO agreed, meeting in Bucharest in Romania, they announced that they would agree to someday allow Ukraine and Georgia to join NATO in 2008. So this is 6 years before 2014. And then Georgia, a former Soviet republic, they were doing everything they could to try to get into NATO. So this little country of Georgia, they had sent a total of 7,000 Georgian army soldiers or military personnel to go serve in occupying Iraq. So, that's a small country, Georgia, right? They sent 7,000 in total military personnel to help in the American occupation, Western occupation of Iraq after the United States invaded it in 2003. And this was all trying to show we're such a good ally of America. See, we support America so much. Please, 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 please let us in. And then in 2008, the NATO made this promise to Georgia and Ukraine. And then there was a conflict that escalated out of control about shortly after that. And Russia then invaded in a nasty war to help the Abkhazians and the South Ossetians break away from Georgia, because they have conflicts with the Georgian majority population in that small country. There's regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, and they broke away. And now they've been recognized as independent states by Russia. And I think Nicaragua and Venezuela have recognized Abkhazia and Ossetia. And it was interesting in this New York Times report, they did make this this point, they didn't remind everybody that in 2008, that NATO, not European Union, NATO made a commitment publicly that Georgia and Ukraine would be able to join NATO. And so that might well be part of the context by which, why would Vladimir Putin encourage, I guess Vladimir Putin was saying he didn't encourage this uprising, this separation of and partition of Ukraine strictly because Ukraine wanted an association agreement with the European Union. It was when there was a coup, an overthrow of the democratically elected president of Ukraine, because some sector of Ukrainian society didn't like his policy decisions as the democratically elected president of Ukraine, encouraged by Hillary Clinton and John McCain and Victoria Nuland and the European Union to overthrow through demonstrations the democratically elected president of Ukraine because they didn't like what he decided. Even though he has some degree of support, we don't really know. I mean, it's a question of what is Ukraine? How intense is Ukrainian nationalism? I told you they took over Crimea without firing one bullet. But the Ukrainian nationalism, Ukraine is a post-colonial multi-ethnic state. There are Ukrainian nationalists, but as I said, the capital of Ukrainian nationalism is Lviv, close to the border with Poland. In that part of Ukraine, it was added to Ukraine by Stalin in World War II, when they took it from Poland. So just how intense is Ukrainian nationalism? Who would fight? Would Ukraine, would there be resistance if, how much might Putin want? I mean, he's not going to annex the entire country. I mean, from Putin's point of view, Ukraine is an artificial state created just 100 years ago by Lenin and Stalin in the 1920s to create this new thing called the Soviet Union and try to convince all the non-Russians in this thing called the Soviet Union, that the Soviet Union is not just some new and improved version of the Russian Empire. And so you have to cut down the political side, the political dominance of Russia in this new Soviet Union. So how are you going to do that? You create these republics, which are created for a number of reasons, but one important reason, one, is to weaken the political dominance of Russia in this new Soviet Union. And so under the Tsarist times, in the imperial regime, there were no borders between Ukraine and Russia and Belarus and Russia. Those were all created in the 1920s. Same is true in what was then called Turkestan. There was no Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, there were Kazakh. Those were all created in the 1920s. And evidently they did create them because they are evidently significant identities today among the peoples of Central Asia. Like, it actually is significant that there is a Kazakh identity, a Turkmen and a Kyrgyz and an Uzbek. I mean, they're real identities, national identities. But like, how strong is that identity in the European part of the old Soviet Union that had been, I mean, particularly in the Western regions that had been part of the Austrian Empire? That those regions, they've been more politically mobilized than Turkestan. And so there are Ukrainian nationalists. There are people who will fight, but how much will they fight for? They're not going to fight for Crimea, but they may well fight for Lviv. But what about Kiev? From a Russian, and it's interesting, as I watch the news reports about this, remember, and this is all relevant because the European Union is supposed to be a peace strategy for Europe. It got the 2012 Nobel Peace Prize. But then in 2014, a war started in Ukraine and 13,000 people are dead. And and over 1 million refugees have fled their homes. In Europe, if you consider Europe going from Portugal to Moscow, Ukraine is in the middle. And so so if the European Union really is a peace strategy, what is it supposed to do? What should it do? What can it do? These are all separate questions. I mean, if question is, and I think that in order to develop a peace strategy, it's necessary, an effective peace, not a stupid peace strategy, an effective peace strategy is you have to have an accurate estimation of what are the ultimate motivations of the belligerents of the target of your peace strategy. What are the motivations for Putin's Russia to be so belligerent regarding Ukraine? And it won't be one motivation, it'll be a number of motivations, but some will be stronger than others, representing politically stronger sectors of society within the Russian polity. What are the sources of Russian belligerence? Is it because, as some people say, like, for example, I remember when Putin intervened in Crimea and Donetsk and Luhansk, I think it was the president or the prime minister of Estonia says, he's a Russian Hitler. He's a Russian Hitler. He's doing to Ukraine what Hitler did to Sudetenland and Czechoslovakia in 1938. He's a Russian Hitler. If you appease him in what he's doing in Ukraine, he's not going to stop in Ukraine. He's then going to move against Estonia and Latvia, and he's going to try to rebuild. He's not going to stop. You never appease a country that's belligerent because it's aggressive, because it perceives itself is surrounded by countries that lack the will to resist it. If you appease it, you make it more aggressive. That was the experience or the lesson learned from dealing with Hitler in 1938. They appeased him in taking the German areas of Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland, and did that make peace in Europe? No, it made World War II more likely, because it confirmed Hitler's view that he was surrounded by sissies, degenerates. They don't have the will to resist. And I remember, I think it was the president or the prime minister or foreign minister of Estonia wrote an article, editorial in the New York Times, saying just that he's a Russian version of Hitler. Or is he belligerent because he thinks that basically, and this is interesting, I read this yesterday or today in the reporting in the New York Times, because it's interesting to see how these journalists are interpreting this, that from Putin's perspective, I already told you, Ukraine is this thing that was created in the 1920s to make Russia weak, you know, and that Russian national identity is critically tied up with what the area that we call Ukraine today. Going back to Crimea, you know, I mean, I don't know how much you know about Russian history, right? But you know, and Kievan Rus, I mean, the first Russian civilization began in Kiev. It was called Kievan Rus 1,000 years ago. Russia became Christian when the ruler of Kievan Rus, the primary prince, Vladimir Monomach, I think in 997, ruler of Kiev, accepted Christianity from the Byzantine Empire, Orthodox Christianity, Pravoslavny religia. And he went to Kiev, he went to what is today Crimea to be baptized. And so, you know, and this was interesting. I mean, this was the New York Times report. They said for Russia to accept that Ukraine would become part of NATO, it's dissolving what it means to be Russian. That is one of the cradles of Russian civilization, maybe not the only cradle, but the beginnings of it from their point of view. And so to that be permanently separated from Russia by joining NATO and the European Union is just unacceptable. The way separating Taiwan is unacceptable to the Chinese, or even more so. It'd be like how the Serbs respond to losing Kosovo, right? And you know, and Tito, he did learn. I mean, before he broke with Stalin, he set up the same plan for Yugoslavia. You got to cut down Serbia as political weight, so divide up Yugoslavia into these different republics. And because you got to counterbalance Serbia, because 50% of the population of Yugoslavia is Serb, just like 50% of the Soviet Union was Russian. So, so what is the? I mean, but you know, the European Union doesn't have a good record of standing up to the United States. If the United States basically thinks that no, Putin, he wants to recreate the Russian Empire. And he wants to, you know, dominate. If you appease him in Ukraine, he's not going to stop there. He's going to go after Latvia and Estonia next, because they were part of the Soviet Union too. And like 1/3 of the population in Latvia and Estonia is Russian. there's a much smaller Russian minority in Lithuania. And he might not stop there. He might try to, work with the Slovaks and, all this conspiratorial thinking. But if you appease an aggressive power, you make him more aggressive, supposedly. But one could be belligerent because they see threat as well. And so what is the European Union, NATO supposed to do, particularly when you have these Ukrainian patriots saying, please let us into NATO. We want to be free, just like Poland, just like the Czechs and the Slovaks. We want to be free. We want to become prosperous democracies like Poland and Slovakia and the Czech. Please let us. You're supposed to say, no, you have to stay in the Russian sphere of influence. I mean, that's why I think there might well be. It's not impossible to imagine a violent partition of Ukraine. Question is how far, and I'm not the first one to say this. I mean, there was a lot of discussion about this 7 years ago, that how far would Russia go? Would they try to annex Kiev too? Kiev's right in the middle of the country. Would they try to partition Kiev the way the Serbs rebelling in Bosnia tried to partition Sarajevo, the Bosnian capital? Okay, there can be a Muslim and a Croat part, but we're going to have our part. And the Russians want their part, just like the Palestinians want their part of Jerusalem. And the Jews don't want to give it to them.
I thought we were going to go over the draft.
Well, I mean, do you have any questions about the draft?
No, but like sometimes I just write what I think is logical, so I can't put like a source. After,
well,
like,
this is your paper is a first draft. Your paper is a first draft, right? And so you wrote down your ideas, but like I say, typically now you have to refine, support, and develop your ideas by finding specific information from scholarly sources, particularly the textbook, to develop and cite and to support your claim. And if you cannot find specific information from the textbook to support your claim, that means you need to revise and define and specify your claim a little bit, right? So you say the U.S. thinks of the global environment, thinks it is a crucial aspect that we must consider worldwide. Well, I mean, first off, that's a very general, broad, vague statement. And if you can find some evidence in the book that says that, okay, but cite it, all right? And if you can't, then you have to revise and develop and refine your own ideas, keeping with the word limit.
Yeah.
Okay, and then also, one of my tasks to help you polish your English, so I make some suggestions as to how you might.
Yeah.
Well, that's just suggestions. Up to you. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so and I think it's beneficial. I mean, that's part of my job is to engage in a dialogue, I think, with the students, so that the students think some more. So I responded to reacted to your comment here. An example: what measure do you take concerning our environment? So you're going to focus on the environment, right, and environmental protections. And I can see how you might make that argument that first off, the European Union can't take on the United States. I mean, it might be desirable to take on the United States, because the United States is a problem, as manifested in Iraq, in Libya, and now in Afghanistan and Iran. But you have, in terms of what is feasible, that might not be politically feasible. So the European Union, if it's going to try to be an actor, it's got to work in an area where there's not too much resistance, certainly from the United States, like global environmental issues. And hopefully some of that cooperation in dealing with fisheries and global trade and environment as part of fisheries and agriculture, because these are all interrelated, right? Environment, development, agriculture, trade, they're all tied together. That the Soviet Union can engage in this neo-functional cooperation that leads to spillover to other areas, right? Because China and Russia and the world and US, they need to cooperate to deal with climate change, right? Even if they're in conflict and competition with each other, there's still areas where they have to cooperate, or they should cooperate, as manifested, for example, in dealing with the pandemic. And the European Union has to pick its battles where it can make a difference, and not rather than try to smash against something that they're going to lose. But, you know, so that means the European Union's got to just basically not do much about Ukraine while continuing to focus on promoting cooperation in areas where it can play a leading role in promoting cooperation between Beijing, Washington, and Moscow and Brussels. I mean, that seems to be how you could justify why you're focusing here, that the European Union, you know, they tried to oppose the United States when the United States decided to invade Iraq, and it was a fiasco for them. They were completely unorganized and unable to resist American pressure. And the European Union collapsed as a single actor, if it had ambitions, despite Paris and Berlin saying, no, don't support the United States invading Iraq. That's a disaster. Still, all the other countries joined the United States, including the countries that wanted to join the European Union in 2004, like Poland and Hungary, and they all cooperated with the United States, despite Paris and Berlin saying, don't cooperate with the United States. So I don't think the European Union is going, they're not going to take on the United States directly. They're going to focus on cooperation on areas where they can promote cooperation, including cooperation involves Beijing and Moscow and United States. And that includes, you know, the global environment issues. That's how I interpret one way by which, I mean, you know, as we contemplate the possibility of war, exponential increase in war in Ukraine, in an area, you know, so incredible numbers of people die. We're going to have more people die. And the European Union, but what is the European Union going to do about it? And there's probably limits to what they can do about it, because I don't think they're going to ever challenge they're not going to challenge directly NATO, because that means challenging the United States. Do you have any questions?
No, I think everything is clear.
Okay, I'll send you the link to the meeting, to the recording, okay?
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.